Okay, so that's Chang. Good evening, everybody. This is Faith. I'm with the Thriving for the Dissertation webinar series. Tonight, we are having Dr. Chang of Eastern University, who serves as the professor and chair of the PhD program in organizational leadership, be our speaker, speaking on the writing style of a qualitative dissertation. She's a trained ethnographer who teaches qualitative research methods and organizational leadership courses in the PhD program and has conducted and published numerous ethnographic and autoethnographic studies. I actually have one with her. And she has gained international recognition as an autoethnographic expert since her notable publication, Autoethnography as Method in 2008. She has published on autoethnography application methods in collaborative autoethnography, transformative autoethnography model, and for practitioners, and I systems thinking model, IST, for organizational researchers. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Chang for tonight's discussion. Thank you, Dr. Chang.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Faith. Did I write that introduction? I don't know, but it's very complimentary and thank you. This qualitative research is one of my favorite subjects, and especially because I am working with qualitative dissertation students. This becomes much more close to my heart. So today, I am going to talk about qualitative dissertation style, and I hope that I give a lot more specific uh, sort of strategies and guidelines that help students or that help people to present their research in a more effective way. So I'm going to cover these different chapters, and there's a question marks, and they're intentional because I am going to talk about that this 5-chapter model is often it's limited for qualitative dissertation. So that's why I don't want to specify there is only one kind than others. Okay. And so let's move forward for each chapter and for each subsection that I am presenting in terms of chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. I am going to talk about what should be in each chapter for especially qualitative dissertation, and then what would be the more of a effective writing strategies for each chapter. So it's a little bit lighter in the front chapters because oftentimes people think that, okay, this is a much more standard, therefore there are a lot of information available for chapter 1 or 2 or 3. But as we go further in terms of findings, discussions, and conclusion, I'm going to give a little bit more detailed writing strategies. So chapter 1, we call it Introduction. So for dissertation, I'm not talking about proposal. I am talking about dissertation. So please make sure that your introduction is really framing the entire document. When chapter 1 was conceived as part of the proposal, of course, nobody anticipated what would be coming for actual data and then data reporting. So that means that chapter 1 constructed for proposal should be revised to reflect that this is an introduction for the entire report, not only first 3 chapters. And I want to emphasize, probably multiple times throughout the presentation, that you do not want to stack heading to heading without any text in between. And especially that APA makes a point that don't stack those headings. And always there should be a text that creates a buffer between those headings. And then because a heading under any heading, that introduction is going to serve as that entirety following that. So if it's an introduction to chapter 1, expectation is that your introductory paragraph is going to be introducing entire document as well as chapter 1, right? And I have seen quite often that their introductory paragraphs ended up being so long, multiple paragraphs, so that people sort of get lost. The readers get lost about what is this document about. So it will be critical that keep this introductory paragraph short. And I say 1 to 3. It's a little bit artificial number, but I wanted to make the point that we are not talking about multiple page introductory paragraphs. Okay. And then your chapter 1 will include research problem, focus, rationale, and then also research purpose and research questions. And then it will include the conceptual framework, and then a little bit overview of your research method and process. And then also that what ethical considerations um, you have followed throughout the research. And finally, that you're going to introduce the reader to the entire structure of your dissertation. So the heading, these are possible headings that I put together. Of course, some people have split some, like a purpose and a question and so on. The bottom line is that however you're going to uh, name the heading, the bottom line is that every heading you have to have 3 or more paragraphs, which means that if you end up having only a 1 paragraph within within any section led by a heading, that means that you can merge with other next headings so that your certain section is not too terribly short in comparison with the others. Okay. And then also that I want to make sure that what is the conceptual framework and how does it relate to your chapter 2 is that I am going to speak a little bit more about that and in this first section. So uh, let's see. Um, Probably there is a little bit of a background noise, if I may. Okay, great, great. Welcome everyone. I actually I'm focusing on my slides, but I did not get to welcome, but it's great to see you all. Okay, great. So so conceptual framework, consider that as a sort of a summary of your chapter 2. And it will introduce your key concepts and then briefly summarize the literature that you will be covering, but you don't need to be doing an entire summary, but just to select some seminal work so that you can show that how different concepts are linked together for your qualitative research dissertation report. And then also that overview of your research method and process is that for the proposal, you're basically writing that these are what you're planning to do. And it's just much more meager with a very little details. Now, for your dissertation, expectation is that you will come here and chapter 1, you will revise it so that it can reflect again, reflect the entire report. So that a little bit more details about specifics, what you have done, and then what was the process and how many people that you have interviewed or how many institutions, programs you have studied. And that kind of overview will be part of your introduction. Of course, that introduction section will be shorter than your chapter 2. So it is not possible that you can be exactly the same page numbers for chapter 1, 2, and 3 when you write the proposal. And of course, that for even dissertation, that is not possible. However, that I strongly encourage you that you do not make certain chapter too overly large and for the entire dissertation. And I'm going to talk about that how you may slice your findings, discussion, and conclusion section later. The bottom line is that consider this writing a dissertation is a book. And especially for qualitative researchers, and there's no question that it is a magnitude of writing a book. So when you write the book, and then you will notice as you are also reading other books, that the amount of the content for each chapter is pretty much equivalent, so that there is no big of a surprise that your chapter is 70 pages as opposed to your chapter one is 10 pages. So always mindful of that. So for the introduction, I would suggest that don't go maybe on the over 20 or 20 to 25 would be probably max. And your chapter two, maybe 40, 45 at max. And then the rest are going to be much smaller than your chapter two. Those, again, page numbers are a little bit um, arbitrary because there can be much variations. But I wanted to make sure that we understand that there is a big effort that authors need to make each chapter relatively comparable and balanced. Okay, so now I'm going to go. How does it go? Okay, chapter two, literature review. I know that many of you who have already done proposal feel that your literature review is done. And therefore, you don't want to go back. I don't want to touch. You just want to slide right into your dissertation and feel like you are done. And the reality is that for both qual and quan, you have to be looking at your chapter one to three. You need to look at it. You need to revise it. There's no question about that. Particularly, the structure for literature review as such would be very favorable. So imagine that. I only artificially put three. If you end up having a more keywords than three, that's fine. But I strongly encourage you that your key concepts would not go more than five. And it is perfectly reasonable for you to have a three, four, five, and in that range, which means that if your key concepts seems to be all over the place, do remember that you can always categorize them, and some you can bring it under some key concepts. And then also that I only give a sub-concept as a 1 to 3. This is the same idea. It's a sub-concepts could be 3 to 5, no more than 5, because that again, that the amount of the writing that you're going to do does not necessitate you have to have such a large the section for each, and then each subsection has a huge amount of writing to do. So 1 to 3, the 3 to 5 is fine. You don't necessarily have to have exactly three for each sections. I don't mean that. The bottom line is that organization would be very critical. And then also that for any section, whether it's a level 2, the heading, or a level 1 heading, keep in mind that you do need 3 paragraphs or more, which means that if you don't have too much say, that means that you probably want to collapse some subsections together. Okay. And then also that I have in yellow, in the light yellow, I said introductory paragraph, which also means that you do need an introductory paragraph at the beginning of your chapter before you start the first level 1 heading, and make sure that you also have an introductory paragraph to separate each headings. Okay, so which means that don't stack key concept 1 and immediately your sub-concept. The reader needs an introduction to your key concept 1 in that section. Okay, And also that always think about transition. So you may be very busy writing if you're working on the proposal, writing about different sections as a chunk, perfectly okay. But when it comes to the revising, editing for yourself, make sure those introductions and transitions from section to section, paragraph from paragraph, these are all included in your thinking as you are revising. All right. So, and then your chapter 2 will end with that gap in the literature or gap of the literature or literature gap, however you want to phrase. The bottom line is that what you want to communicate with this section that um, is that you want to provide a summary of what's in the literature. In other words, you have already discussed three key concepts. So you have a place for you to summarize that what kind of literature are out there in the field that dealing with different concepts, but also that what is not being covered in relation to your study. And that's what you want to explicitly highlight so that this gap in the literature basically allows you to segue into your chapter 3. Courtney, you have a heads up. Go ahead. Do you have a questions?
Yep, just a quick question about the introductory paragraph for each key concept.
Yeah.
Would it be wise to introduce the key concept and then whatever sub-concepts will be in there before you go through?
Right. So the key concepts, I would introduce them in the initial introduction under chapter 2.
Mhm.
But then under each key concept, you can use that introduction as a way to introduce sub-concepts under that.
Okay, cool.
So
Thank you.
do not do the entire thing. Yeah, at once.
Thanks.
Okay. The bottom line is that literature review is that follow key concepts, which means that organize it in a way. And then also that keep in mind for each sub-concept, having a one or two sources is not enough. And then you need to have a really substantial chunk of literature for each subsection, sub-concepts for you to compare and contrast, and also you can elaborate on in some important pieces. So try not to stretch it by giving an entire paragraph to one source and an entire paragraph to another source, maybe introduction, and thinking that you're done with a sub-concept of a one section. So that would be critical. So how to write effectively for literature review. So I have inserted some of these the slides along the way for different sections. And so here is that my wisdom the slide. And the left side is the don't, and then the right side isn't do. They are interconnected. So I'm going to talk more broadly. I'm not going to kind of delve right into that and for every slide because of the time, but it's basically the literature review is not a merely talking about generally what the literature is about, and then you put a lot of stringing sources in parentheses. Okay. We consider that, as scholars consider that it's a lazy way of handling sources because it's an easier for us to just write about what we think and then sticking those sources. And then there you have a very little accountability about using literature that way because you're not telling us exactly how the source 1 and source 2 are related, and you're not critiquing how the source 1 is good or not good or has missed something and not. So by merely just expository exposing that all the literature in your own words and sticking those literature in parentheses, that is not going to work. If you're going to do it, then pull some out and give a little bit more specific about those the sources that you have selected to discuss more deeply and compare and contrast. This is a beautiful way of doing a lump sum introduction and pulling some out and then compare and contrast in a critical way and then wrap it up and moving into the next. And this is a beautiful way of using, but not merely sticking sources in parentheses. It's not going to work. Okay. So that means also that when you discuss certain sources, that I want you to use a different styles, writing styles. So summarizing as a big group, a lump sum of a group and general introduction of this group of literature is one thing. And then sticking all these sources, that's fine. But when you pull some out and then specifically discussing certain aspects of the sources, and remember that especially some of the definitions, the wording they have done can be very important. In that case, feel free to use a direct quotations, but do not use it very long. And especially in chapter 2, it is not a good idea to use block quotations. So for block quotations for APA, you need 40 words, and that stretches multiple lines. And certainly you do not need, absolutely, you do not need the block quotes for the chapter 2. So very, very rarely, but we want you to use those direct quotes, because the direct quotes are basically telling the reader that you have read it. You have read it, you have thought about it, you more seriously selected those portions. So that's a good idea. Sometimes you can do the direct quotations with a few words, one of phrases that are dominant, that is important, and you're okay with that. Any direct quotations, whether you're doing a phrase or you are as a sentences, make sure you give the page numbers. That's very important. And also, now it's on the right side, interspersed direct quotes, paraphrases, and your evaluation. What it means is that when you paraphrase, let's say study 1, study 2, how similar, different, and that is the good comparison and contrast. However, that it is not sufficiently evaluative, and that's also that we like you to do. So the critical evaluation. So for example, if a study A and B all very interestingly looking at different aspects of a certain concept that you are studying. However, one study A studied with adults, young adults, and study 2 was more of an executive leaders. Make that point out so that what certain studies have done well with the populations they have studied. So that is kind of your evaluation needs to be interspersed in literature review, not only your expository writing about what the literature is. And we consider that is a shallow and then it's insufficient literature review. So a lot of the term papers oftentimes are written that way. And so you just write your opinions basically based upon literature maybe, but then you just stick the literature sources here and there, and that's not sufficient for chapter 2. Number 2, left side is that merely summarizing literature as a group or one at a time is not sufficient, as I said. Always link. So for example, I'm going to give a little bit more space to study 1 because it's very critical to in relation to my study. So I do that. And then I'm going to introduce the second study 2, but merely adding to study 2 without connecting with the study 1 is not sufficient. So for example, there are a lot of connector words that can be very effective by using 1. So something like a similarly, in contrast, differently, on the same subject, and on the same population as study 1, study 2, also studied, and so on. So by using those connector words, that what you are doing is that you're creating a glue for entire pieces you are discussing, but in a meaningful and organized way, not merely just patching it here and there, dropping this different literature, okay? And use more recent literature, and then also that research articles. And sometimes when your studies, your sources are all glummed together, I'm not sure that how this certain studies are actually real studies reporting real research, and which articles are review articles or which articles are opinion articles and so on. It's very hard. So especially when you are discussing research articles, it would be very helpful for you to say mixed method study of da 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 da, or correlation study and so on. That's fine. For quant people or for a qual study, it does not mean you only have to cite qual research, vice versa. So it is important that you have a good understanding of the literature that is being done in the field. And then do not use the secondary sources mostly. And secondary sources means textbooks are secondary sources, or someone's work is being cited. Okay, so someone else is writing about, let's say, Heidegger's phenomenology. Well, I want you to go, your PhD students, go to the Heidegger's work and then see that what Heidegger had to say about certain things. So that would be important. They use more of a primary sources. And then also that Kathy Sharmas is that interpretive grounded theorist. Well, I like to see you cite hers rather than somebody who used that and then only citing the secondary sources in that. So that is what I mean by secondary and then first primary. Now the chapter 3 methods section. And remember, for dissertation, you have to report that what you have done. So proposal, chapter 3, you use always future tense because you're telling us about the plan. And many of the plans might have not worked out in the qualitative research. And in the process, you might have added much more rich ways of collecting data and so on. You have a lot to tell us about how you actually conducted the research. That's much more important. So make sure that your chapter 3 is well revised before you put it together as a dissertation. And again, introductory paragraph, we need that. You will do the method chosen. So what method you have chosen, and then why you have chosen that. And then what was your population, how you did the sampling. So it's not here, it's not a hypothetically, I am going to use criteria purposive sampling. Here, you're actually telling us that what the criteria you set and how you solicited and recruited members, how you recruited your research, your data sources, and then what have you done? What kind of data collection have you used? What kind of questions you have asked? And all of that. So now you have a wealth of information you can report back to us so that we can be convinced that you have done your research thoroughly, and that is the place for you to demonstrate that your study is being done well. Now that the participant and case profiles, what I mean by that is that because you have already now collected solicited the participants and also if it's going to be a program or it's an institution case studies, we need to know that what they are, who they are. Not only that how you selected them, and we need to know who they are. And of course, in the grounded theory, this who they are may not be as important, even though that it is the categorically general demographic information. It can provide a great context for your grounded theories that you have generated for your study. But particularly for case studies or narratives or phenomenology, and this kind of participant context is very important. So I'm going to talk about how you may present that, but keep in mind, you will use a pseudonym, but you want to create some kind of a table. I generally recommend my students to do that, and so that we can see a full list of people or the institutions that you have studied. And that is the important part. You are not able to include this information when you're doing your proposal. And now this is an opportunity. Now, also the data collection method and procedures, we need to see more details about how you actually collect data. So anything that you have written in the proposal is not sufficient for your dissertation. You do need to give details. And then also how you did the analysis. And so that again, we are convinced there are data analysis that you have performed and then is a very sound approach that has yielded that the findings that you're going to report in the future chapters. And so that is very, very important details that you're going to provide. And again, it will give a more credibility to your study that when we see much more specifics and details that what you have done. Now, this the latter part is an assurance of a qualitative research rigor and quality. And you do need to explain to us how you have ensured. We're not talking about IRB. IRB you have already spoken about in the ethical and so on, ethical considerations. Here, so what have you done? How can we trust that data you collected are credible data? How do we know that you've verified that data, interview data you have collected? And what kind of strategies have you used to verify that? Okay. Or how do we know that your data analysis reflect that the reality of the people? So there are different strategies and different methods that you can engage to make sure the qualitative research process, data collection, the analysis, all of it have gone through the rigorous process to convince us this is a good study. That chapter will end with a summary. Typically, most of the chapters will end with a summary, but not all. Chapter 1, it did not have a summary. I'm perfectly okay. I mean, if you want to do a summary, fine. But sometimes the summary is sometimes it can get away from transitioning to the next chapter. Some summary can be actually beautifully serving as a transitional piece. So again, it is up to you how you want to do that. Now I'm going to the wisdom slide where effective writing strategies for methods section is that do not leave your future tense because you're reporting reporting on this already completed data. Okay, so don't be lazy about that. That's important. And do not leave the explanation of your data analysis procedures meager as the level of a proposal. It should not, because you have already done quite a bit of a effort into that. So again, revise that and do not. And then also number 3 on the left side is that for your proposal, you probably spend quite a bit of time to describe your method and to demonstrate that you know your method and the history, all of that. Now, for the dissertation, it's a little bit more out of proportion. If it's end up being so much, you should cut it down to give a little balance. What really has to be the centerpiece for your chapter 3 is that what you have done and how you selected and who have been selected, how you collected data, how this analysis worked, and so on. Not necessarily what is the phenomenology is about and who has written, what's the history of it, and why you have chosen. Why you have chosen is important, but trim it down so that don't feel shy about edit out some stuff from your proposal. You don't have to be married to any of that. Ultimately, diminish the quality of your dissertation. So feel free to edit out if it's not the centerpiece. And so the bottom line is the proposal, 3 chapters that you have written, it served its own purpose, but it is not sufficient for your dissertation. Instead, revise all verbs and to reflect you have done it, and add all this detail that they can talk about your research so that the reader can be convinced that your research was done well. And then again, tell us about the participants, and so on. Okay. So I'm going to move to the next chapter 4 to question mark, and that is going to be a little bit more complicated. And if you are wedded to chapter 5 chapters, or whether your advisors insist that chapter 5 dissertation, I'm not going to go against them. I'm not going to be saying that, hey, you're wrong, totally wrong. But typically in a qualitative research tradition, we are not we don't live by this 5 chapter model, because that is more came from a Kwan. And so if researchers who grew out of this qualitative tradition from the very beginning, that we don't necessarily buy into that chapter 5. And I'm going to explain why. But again, this is a little bit more of an open end. You may remember earlier from my earlier talk that balancing the content for different chapters, and as if you're writing a book manuscript. And so the truthfully is that what the quality researchers collect, the rich data they collect, and the rich processing they have worked with, the findings they have done is really a lot. So trying to fit all of it into one chapter called the findings is going to make that chapter extremely fat compared to other chapters. And then also that because when it's all condensed in one place, and it is not necessarily helping reader to read through it and to really appreciate your study. So typically that there are a good way of dividing this content in different ways. And then that's what I'm going to talk about. But if it's a chapter 5 chapter model, if that's what you've been advised, then go for it. But I'm not going to talk about that model in this chapter, in this chapters. So I'm going to talk about 5 different models of how you may merge, combine, and findings, discussions, and conclusion. I call that model 1 all separately, model 2 findings and discussion together, and model 3 is a discussion and conclusion together. And then model 4 is the multi-institutional case study, how to do this case study in the findings about different cases. And model 5, I would call free flowing narrative and more of a creative qualitative study. So I'm going to talk about first, all separately. That means your chapter 4 is going to be about the one topic. And then when I say topic, which is based upon really is a more of an in-depth analysis. So let's say you have coded your data, you have a group together, and then you have a split some of this codes to make sure that there is a findings. Dominant findings are emerging in your study. So there's a theme-based findings on topic 1 is that topic 1 is an artificially introduced from outside. It's grew out of your data analysis. So that if you can make this 3 major topics that can oversee or can combine multiple related themes, this is a great place that you can pull them together and you can write a one chapter about. And then you have another chapter, and then you have another chapter. Of course, these are separate fragments of your data. So you need to pull it all together, and then you also need to place them, contextualize them into the literature. That's what the discussion is about. So chapter 4, 5, 6 in the model 1 is that you will introduce your data, and then you explain your data, you explain your themes, and you give a data vignettes to support your findings, and then you interpret what this all means. That's what the findings are doing well, findings chapter. Discussion is that you're going to pull all these findings together, and then you're going to the work with the literature and say how your findings can compare with the existing literature, similarly, differently, and then so on. So that the bottom line for the discussion is that you're going to let us know, let the readers know that your findings are giving some insights to be added to the literature as you had identified the gap in the literature. So discussion is more of a literature-based, but I'm going to talk about how the discussion is different than chapter 2. I'm going to talk about that. The conclusion, I also have some details about what needs to be in the conclusion, is that you bring it all together. So conclusion is not mere summary of your themes. It's not a merely patchwork your theme and say, hey, this is a conclusion. No. You, as a researcher, will have to make the final statement about how this all findings and themes are put together to inform us about the phenomena that you studied. So conclusion, consider that is your conclusion based upon what you have found in the data, how you have compared your data with the literature. Therefore, tell me about what is the final things that you can talk about your study. So that's a conclusion. So that's the model 1. You put it all separately. Model 2 is that you can see it here in chapter 4, 5, 6. You may focus on that again, theme-based findings on topic 1, but you want to add the discussion at the end of that chapter. So in other words, that there's a data, whole bunch of data, you will explain what it means, but then how the data is connected to the literature on this specific topic, topic 1, and topic 2, and topic 3. And so when you disperse the discussion to each chapters, and then your chapter 7 is less likely that you're going to bring a huge discussion section about the literature. So because you have taken care of it in each chapter 4, 5, 6. And so that your conclusion, still, you have to give a conclusion about the entire findings. It's almost like, I think about it as you have to be soaring over your data. And then you are going to make them some statement about what you have discovered from your study. Model 6 is that discussion and conclusion put together, which means that unlike model 1, 7 and 8 are converged. Okay, so that 4, 5, 6 would be on different topics, but chapter 7 will include discussion and conclusion as well. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. So let me move forward. Chapter 4 is that it's a particularly multi-institutional case study or multi-case study. Let me put it that way. I'm not talking about individual case studies, and we don't encourage that in our department. You just do a few individuals and study them, unless it is a major narrative study, but we don't call that case study. When I talk about the multi-institutional, multi-case studies, we're talking about a large unit of whatever that importance will be studied and multiple of those. I just gave us 3 questions. Oh, Faith, do me a favor. Faith, I see typos here.
I already made a note of it. I will take care of everything after
Yeah, yeah,
after we
yeah,
end.
yeah, yeah. It's my mistake, and Faith is going to help me to fix it. So chapter 4 is a within case analysis of case 1. And then chapter 5 is a within case analysis of case 2. Chapter 6 would be within case analysis of chapter 3. In other words, each chapter is going to talk about case. It could be the case of the history of that institution and how they are doing certain things and who makes up this case and what is an impact, whatever the focus is. So these 3 studies will be, 3 cases will be separately analyzed, but also that multi-case study needs to have cross-case analysis. So when you put all 3 together, what is the similarities? What are differences? Why similarities exist? Is it significant that differences do exist? And what does that mean? All of the cross-case analysis needs to be done. And then also that it needs to be contextualized to the larger data, larger literature in the discussion. So the model 4 is specifically about case study. The reason why I am bringing this one up is that, as you can tell, the qualitative methods and does influence how the dissertation is going to be presented, how the case data is going to be presented, and so on. And then I'm not saying as much, but also that do remember that even data vignettes, what kind of data vignettes are fitting better for the phenomenology, grounded theory, and narratives would be different. For example, the narratives, the voice of the participants is very important, and then the continuity of the stories are important. So the citation for those direct quotes tend to be longer. Phenomenology is a maybe more of a medium size because you are going to capture some of the meaningful, significant, maybe emotionally related kind of portion. It doesn't have to be entire story. That includes context, but the segments that you will select for phenomenology, it would be in the moderate size, but it can have a block quotations and it's perfectly fine. It's very possible. Case studies, probably it's more likely that the researcher is going to be recraft and reconstruct case based upon all kinds of data. So those data may come from interviews, they may come from documents, they may come from observations. So they may not be all coded in a certain ways, but the bottom line is that those pieces are put together to construct a case. So it's more like a flowing case. The narratives would be appropriate. Now that the theory is that the ground theories, do you remember? They are coding in a much more, they do microcoding, and then so that they don't work with a very large data chunks. It's more appropriate. The ground theorists are doing citing in the smaller chunks and then making sure that how they are smaller chunks and then being added to construct a theory. So depending on the methods, that presentation of data would be different, and then also that the chapter constructions could be different. But only thing that I made a point to be distinctive is the model 4, that is for the especially case study. And model 5 is a free-flowing narrative creative qualitative study. And it could be used by anybody. It could be phenomenologists, it could be ground theorists. But the bottom line is that it does not follow that the structure. The first chapter, second chapter is the literature review, third chapter is a method. In the past, we have also had a student who actually followed this one and created a much more interesting case study by not necessarily capturing all this literature review and method in the same way. It's all kind of showed up at the end. He's Campbell, the first one of the first cohort members who also won the dissertation award. So there's some example, but rare. And then also that my dissertation, ethnographic dissertation, that is based upon 1 year of field work, and it has 10 chapters plus 1 chapter on methods. And so it can be different. And then the bottom line is that you need to consult with your advisor. And but I don't want to say that one is totally wrong and the other is totally right. Okay, Courtney, what's your questions?
For Model 5, this is what the like the entire structure of the dissertation is. It's structured that way with the themes.
Number four? Number four?
No, Model 5. So it says themes
Model
on topic one thing. Is
Yeah.
that or is that the conclusion that's written that way?
No. Model 5 is the entire dissertation.
Okay.
And then also that I realized the Model 5, I did not include 1 to 3, and so as the earlier ones. So Model 1 to 3, 3, 4, 5, I did not include chapter 1 to 3 because that's a standard chapter 1 to 3.
Thank
And
you.
then the Model 5, I included chapter 1 and 2 and 3 because it's just very different. Yeah? Got it? Okay, good. Okay, so effective writing strategies for findings. And I know that some people have been struggling with this, how to do the findings, how to do the themes. And but I'm struggling to finish in time, as usual, Heewon's problem. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to point out a few things, and then the PowerPoint will be made available for you. So feel free to explore more. The bottom line is that the findings, especially in qualitative research, is not a patchwork of your data vignettes. Data do not speak for itself. You will always have to frame. If you're going to present a group of data, make sure that why you are doing it, why this is meaningful, and how does this speak to the theme or sub-theme that you are introducing, and then always frame it, then provide the data vignettes to support. Okay, and then if you want to include a discussion, following that discussion, the literature has to follow later. Literature should not be on the top as an organizing structure for your data. No, qualitative research is that your conclusion is coming out of the data, not the literature. So that the philosophical and epistemological orientation should guide you, that you're going to tell us what you have discovered and how does it connect with the literature. That's one thing. Okay, and the second thing is that I don't want you to think about this the themes. The themes is not a merely kind of a categorized codes. I know you do the open codes and you categorize them and then you begin to write, and which is fine. But the bottom line is that this one category of a data does not constitute theme. As we talked about, theme may come from that, but theme may come from also connecting the categories of that codes, or it can transcend entire categories, and then it can provide some more of an insight about the entire data. So merely piecing this coded data together, constructing a chapter and saying that this is your findings, and it's not. So I just want to make sure you have to do your work. Coding is a very preliminary, but you really have to soar above your data to be able to see that how the data are connected and there's what's not there in the data. You also want to ask questions why that the data shows this way and not. This is all part of your data analysis of interpretation that has to be coming into your findings. And then discussion, I talked about that discussion It's not like a chapter 2. So do not tell me about the literature that you have already reviewed. It's there. Tell me what is your findings and how your findings are connected to the literature. The literature is there to serve you. Whether it will be supporting you or whether it's contradicting you, the bottom line is the literature is not your centerpiece in the discussion. And then also that you can do very selective literature in connection to your findings. And then a lot of times, maybe that you did not do the literature review on the certain topics when you're doing proposal because you did not know what the findings were going to be. So you do need to you go out and do the additional literature review, particularly on this topics that you're covering in your discussion. So conclusion. What is the conclusion? Is that I want you to remember that is a conclusion for the entire report. It is not about only chapter 4, 5, 6. So keep in mind that you're providing the conclusion. And then also that keep in mind that summary of findings is not the final conclusion. So with a discussion, and then you will revisit your your research questions and how your research questions have been answered, not answered, is perfectly fine. But be prepared to give a more big bang conclusions. That's what people are looking for. And then I say, make sure you want to use a visualization of the data, especially grounded theorists. I insist that they make the theory and within this visual presentation, which is very, very effective. So I want you to think about that. And then researchers' reflections and implications. Again, there are effective writing strategies for conclusions. And I talked about use a table effectively, not too much, but effectively. Especially table is great when you can show the summary of your themes, the multiple themes that are different places. And then the bottom line is that when you any table you present or any visual presentation figures you present, always you have to explain. Present the table and explain the content of it. And then the reader is not going to understand what you mean. So you have to let the reader know why you are presenting that and what this means, and then so on. Okay, good. So I'm going to stop here and I will and open the floor for questions. And then whoever needs to leave according to the set time, I'm perfectly okay, but I will be staying here for additional questions to answer. So Faith, however you're moderating,
Keep going.
yeah,
Yeah, if you just want to, I don't know if you want to close your screen so you can see everybody.
yeah, that would be great. Yeah, great. A good suggestion. All right. So any questions?
No, but could you stop sharing your screen?
Stop sharing the screen. Yeah, there we go. All right, good.
Courtney, anything else?
I was just going to look over. I kind of took some notes, but a question about like the other variations. That's like the first time I'm hearing about that, and I'm intrigued by the creative, free-flowing narrative,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering. I'm imagining that it's a conversation we have with our committee.
Mhm.
But if that was something we were interested in, you know, that we can kind of bring up like, hey, I'm thinking about this particular style.
Hmm. So, in the current PhD world in the US, where there's everybody is efficiently more wanting to finish and move on, you probably will not see too many of them. But in our program, um, Charlie Campbell's work, it resembles that a little bit of a alternative creation. And then, of course, that I was his advisor, and my dissertation had 10 chapters, and it is a monograph. 11 chapters. So things like that, it is more convertible into a books because publishers do not like the dissertation formatted that's so much looking like a dissertation. So even mine was almost like a written like a manuscript, a book manuscript. We had a conversation about where this method and the method of reflection has to be, and it ended up being at the end. We're moving it around in chapter one and so on.
Cool.
So yeah, and then but you start the conversation sooner with your faculty,
Mhm.
and then and but especially that because we insist that the proposal has a three chapters, and then we all Charlie had to do three chapters, but then later they moved it around and create this as a really wonderful case study. So
Cool.
that feel free to check him out.
Yeah. He's on the list of
Yep.
dissertations?
Mhm.
Okay, cool.
Is one of the earlier ones.
Great. All right. Thank you, Dr. Chang. Appreciate your time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Bye bye, and thank you, Faith.